Hi everyone, my name's Josh Gallagher, and today we're going to talk about something that is a constant thing on the top of marketers' minds, and that's e-commerce. And I think one of the things that we want to talk about today, and one of the things that we've found over the last 10 months or 12 months, is that there's huge growth in e-commerce. Every week there's a new stat around the growth that's coming out of markets around the world, and particularly around Asia, which makes up over 60% of the e-commerce market globally at the moment. And we're seeing brands increasingly have a big portion of their retail sales attributed to e-commerce. But a lot of marketers are being left behind or wondering where that growth is coming from. We're seeing consumers take a lead in it, but a lot of marketers are trying to catch up on the actual growth and realizing it as part of their business. So today, we're going to get our lovely partners from Facebook to come on and join us and have a bit of a discussion and a presentation around some of those growth levers, particularly around discovery, commerce for growth, and what are some of the new areas where we're looking to expand our thinking within e-commerce. And of course, Facebook are making a big play, as are a lot of social platforms, in expanding what they do from an e-commerce perspective, not just some of those lower funnel things, but how they treat the full funnel of e-commerce on social platforms. So I'll introduce Carlos and let him take it away. If there's any questions that come up, please put them in the comments box. I'm going to ask Carlos some questions as we go, because I think it's interesting to have a chat about this. But over to you, Carlos.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Josh, for inviting me on here. It's really excited to be on the Loop Live with you guys. As Josh mentioned, I work at Facebook. I'm a strategist, and I sit in the global agencies team in Singapore, but I cover the Asia Pacific region. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about commerce, and particularly commerce from a growth perspective. This chart here says something that I think we all intuitively know, in that growth is the #1 agenda on for most CEOs, and therefore for most people, it then trickles down through the organization and becomes the #1 agenda for marketers, and also then with their partners like the MediaComs and the Facebooks of the world. And that's really what we want to focus on today, is talk about growth. Now, obviously this year, the past 12 months, and still in this year, growth has been a bit more tricky to come by than most years that have gone past. We know that we've been in a global pandemic and a global recession, so actually getting growth has been somewhat of a challenge. But one area, as Josh mentioned, where growth has been possible is in the area of e-commerce. And we've seen 24% growth last year, which is really an acceleration, which has compressed 3 years of growth into 1 year. So e-commerce is definitely an area whereby businesses have been able to achieve growth. So therefore, putting our thinking caps on, we've been sitting here saying, okay, now if there's been, say, 24% worth of growth there, have all businesses been able to achieve that? Have some businesses been able to miss those growth opportunities? And indeed, looking forward to the rest of 2021, it is looking more and more positive now, but do some businesses still challenged to find growth in the rest of the year? How can we help businesses achieve growth through digital commerce? When we looked at understanding, okay, all the areas of growth, looking at all the successful case studies that we've seen and all the successful businesses who have achieved growth, we wanted to understand and structure a mechanism or a way to look at growth from a digital commerce perspective that would help businesses understand, okay, what levers are there for me to use? I might be doing some of these already. What other options are there available for us? And this is looking at a matrix and looking at 4 different areas, which we think is quite evergreen, in that each of these areas, whilst we're going to talk through some very specific dimensions within each, actually, you should be able to use this matrix in 12 months' time, and 24, and 2 years or 3 years' time, and still look at and still apply it in that time. Some of the specifics might change, but it should be a matrix that can help you from a forward-facing perspective, always think about growth. So the 4 areas that we'll talk about are presence, so where can you achieve growth, what channels, what markets; people, who can be my source of growth, where those opportunities exist; experience, this is really about how you can drive growth through the buying experience or shopping experience itself; and then behaviors. Are there any new and emerging shopping behaviors or buying behaviors that the consumer is exhibiting that you can leverage to achieve growth. And so we'll look at all of these in turn. And as Josh said, he's going to interrupt me and keep me honest, and we'll discuss them all as we go. But please do ask any questions as we go. Right, getting straight into it, the first driver of growth, and this is presence. And I think marketers are really, really comfortable with the notion of physical presence or physical availability and the importance of physical availability for driving growth. The interesting dimension comes when you look at physical availability or your availability from a digital perspective across the different e-commerce channels that are available. So the data on the right, and this cuts across 7 Asia-Pacific markets, shows from the end of last year where the consumer had been shopping in the last 4 weeks. The interesting point about this, in no single market do you have a real over-dominance of any one specific particular channel. So even if you look at some place like Indonesia, whereby, yes, there's a dominance, a lot of people are using online marketplaces. The next one down, like e-commerce website, has 50% of people going to it, following by about 45% messaging apps, etc. So you have a lot of different, even in a market whereby there's a high dominance of online marketplaces, there's a lot of other digital channels that the consumer likes to visit. And even on the other end of the spectrum, somewhere like Hong Kong, you have all of the different channels vying in at between that 25 and 35% mark. Now, the implication here for marketers is pretty simple. If you're not where the consumer is, then you're going to miss out on buying opportunities for that consumer. So it's really, really important that you look at your different markets, look at the buying behaviors and different channel behaviors that the consumers exhibit, and build your presence in those spaces. The next aspect of growth, or presence, is looking at, if we've looked at channels, the next aspect that we look at is market and where the consumer is comfortable from buying from. Are they comfortable only buying from e-commerce players who are available in their market? But what we've actually seen is a trend and a tendency for them to be more and more comfortable buying internationally from different e-commerce players or from different businesses. And we've seen huge growth, so 21% increase in cross-border e-commerce behavior. And there's a number of different variety of reasons that are driving this. So that might be availability. I can't get this product from my local market, so I'm going to go internationally. Price advantage, discovering new things that aren't available in my market, or actually there's better quality products. So there's a lot of different reasons and a lot of different benefits that businesses can tap into to expand and go internationally. But it's definitely something that the consumer's been more and more comfortable with and being more and more willing to buy internationally. So, and then when we look at the different case studies and the different examples of businesses that have had success in driving growth through presence, there are a lot of different options available. So on the first two that you see on the left-hand side here are examples of people who've expanded their channel presence, so whether or not that be like Zaka and expanding and building a direct-to-consumer website and using an ad product like dynamic ads that will surface their product catalog to the right consumer at the right time, or whether or not you're like Sabina, which is a female fashion brand in Thailand, whereby they wanted to build their presence through marketplaces and leveraging collaborative ads. Or does it go into something like Facebook has recently launched Shops, which is available on Instagram and Facebook, which essentially enables people to build a shopping presence within those channels. And then last case study is there from Happy Socks, who within over a 10-year period managed to go from a Scandinavian startup to expanding across to 90 different markets globally. So there's been real success and real growth that people have been able to achieve, either by expanding the digital presence or that geographical presence. That's the first one done. Presence, really looking at that distribution in different channels, but also that geographical distribution across different markets and availability in different countries. Josh, any questions on this one?
I will. I'll jump in with the question on this one, because I think it's really interesting and it's something that we're seeing a lot. And I think especially as e-commerce channels expand and more players have offerings. I saw in the US the other day that Yahoo, who I wasn't really sure whether they were still going, but Yahoo now have a native shopping feature within what they're doing. But the question for me is around some of those more traditional brands, and maybe some of those brands that do have a predominant physical presence. The way that they operate normally is in silos. So you have a way that you define growth within a market and within a channel, right? So how do you think, as those brands shift and learn from some more digitally and digital commerce native brands, What are the kind of tips that we have for operationalizing some of these insights that you've got around presence?
Yeah, I think it's all very good and easy for us to say here that, look, you can expand geographically in different channels, etc. But you're absolutely right that a big part of that is operational decisions. I think one of the benefits that the more nimbler, more startup brands do have is they have things like centralized budgetary and centralized decision making. So therefore, it's easy for them to switch on, open different markets, and they don't have to go through internal processes and procedures for that expansion. I think the other area that is really important from an operational perspective is the network of partners that you're willing to use and leverage, and technologies that you're willing to use. So whether we have a whole range of Facebook marketing partners, and I'm sure Mediacom has a list of partners who can help businesses expand geographically in different models. So rather than doing it all by yourself, you will outsource a lot of those different components. So you've got to be willing to change your operations to say, okay, I'm not going to own all of the lines. I'm going to use different suppliers, and I'm going to be willing to make that sacrifice for speed and ease of distributing and getting my operations set up.
Cool.
Right. Let's go on to the next driver. The next one is looking at people. And so who is my source of growth? What can I think about from a person and a people's behavior perspective? Now, I think one of the really critical things that's happened over the last 12 months, and I think everyone is aware of this, is that everybody has had to experience, or more people have had to experience, e-commerce who weren't familiar to it because of lockdown situations. So you had people like Gen X, boomers who weren't familiar to e-commerce coming into e-commerce because simply due to national lockdowns and because they wanted to buy. So you've seen a huge growth in new consumer groups coming on to e-commerce. So the fastest growing consumer group for most, in a lot of different markets across Asia Pacific, was actually Gen Z and boomers from an e-commerce perspective. Coupled with this, you also have an interesting dynamic happening last year that we observed, that more people were willing to try new products and new brands, much more so than we've ever seen before. So 1 in 3 people being willing to try it last year. Again, maybe this was because of the disruption to people's normal behaviors coming from the pandemic, etc. But people would have a willingness to try new brands. Ultimately, this led to the fact that there would be new consumer groups and new segments that were there and were that businesses could tap into as new sources of growth. So really trying to move from your traditional view of this is my target audience to actually looking at very broad and new audience segments and expanding to attract new consumers and new sources of growth. The second aspect of people, and linked to that, and I think that was the second point that I made around people buying new things, actually comes from the new behaviors that we've seen last year. I think 98% of people have said that they've changed their behavior somewhere and that behavior is going to stick. Right now, I'm currently considering working from home permanently. Facebook's very generously enabling people to think about whether or not they want to opt into working from home permanently. And that's something that I'm considering. And that's a lot of those different types of behaviors have happened. So loads of people have new rituals, new occasions, and new moments that have occurred. And therefore, there's new opportunities for brands to look at, okay, this is a new moment for them. Perhaps that is a new source of growth or a new occasion for me to build with that consumer. Great case study that we've seen, and this comes out of Vietnam. It is an e-commerce player called Tiki. Tiki was primarily known as a book retailer, but they were an e-commerce retailer like many others, whereby they had a full suite and range of products, and they wanted to expand their portfolio and actually wanted to grow into new occasions and new moments and be seen as something much more than a book retailer. So they created a really, really interesting campaign called Click and Get Around the Clock. It is pretty much what it says on the tin, whereby they said, okay, there's loads of different moments that we have products that are available that tap into different rituals and different occasions that the consumer has. And people think about these products in certain different moments and different occasions. So we want to serve up advertisements that are relevant to those different moments and different occasions, whereby trying to connect the consumer to get to them to understand that we have a much broader offering and much broader portfolio. And so they created all these different series of ads that were time-based according to different moments, like working out in the morning, surfing commuting in the afternoon, bedroom DJ in the evening, etc. And then and then looking to reposition how they were seen from the consumer perspective. Okay, this is the people one. Josh, any questions on this one?
No big questions on this one, but I think it's a really interesting point to bring up. I think when we've talked about e-commerce in the past, it's very much been around shifting demographics and new people coming on platforms and new people buying. But I think the second point around occasions is really important, and that's where we can maybe creatively impact people and convince them to buy by being much more relevant in what they do, as opposed to just expanding our targeting and hoping for growth. This kind of gives us a bit more control around growth, I think.
No, absolutely. And I think there's a real great creative opportunity in the world of dynamic creative and doing really interesting dynamic time-based or different data signal-based communication that just increases the relevance and situational context of a communication and just increases its power. And I think there's really great, interesting opportunities there as well.
And I think that's a really good example of something that's just really simple, like using time-based creative and time-based occasions or day-parted based occasions, as opposed to getting overly complex with attitudes and behaviours and all of those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Okay, the third area that is an opportunity to growth, we call this one experience. I think one of the things that we sometimes can get lost in and potentially forget when it comes to e-commerce and digital commerce particularly, is that actually when we think about commerce and things like that, the consumer thinks about shopping, and traditionally shopping for a lot of people is actually a really joyful and pleasurable and fun experience, and we might get lost in the clicks and the experience and optimization and incrementality thinking. But actually from a consumer perspective, there's a lot of joy and a lot of fun to be had from shopping, and we've seen that data, and that's true across the region. So whether or not you're in China, India, Singapore, or in any other market, people do love shopping. I think shopping is still seen as Singapore's #1 pastime. In China, it's the #1 leisure activity. That's e-commerce shopping, so it's more than sport, for example. So it's something that is still a really, really fun and joyful experience. So the point here is that if you enhance that experience, if you make it more fun, then consumers will talk about that, they will redo that, and they're more likely to convert and purchase in that joyful experience than in one that's not. And the same is true in the other way, in that things that block the consumer from purchasing and barriers that block the consumer from purchasing, or what we call friction, will cause consumers to drop up and will be sources of negative growth, essentially. And the alarming figure at the top, this was actually from 2 years ago, but it was a study done by BCG looking at to say that actually in Asia Pacific alone, there's $325 billion of revenue lost due to friction behaviors. So actually you can convert that into growth by eliminating friction from the purchase experience. So this can definitely be a really, really interesting source of growth, whether or not you're trying to enhance, put the joy, put the fun, put a more delightful experience into the shopping experience, or simply trying to remove friction and make it easier, more fluid, and more simple. And then there's thinking about that for different categories. Some categories, it might be something, like your routine purchase might be more better to remove friction versus something that people innately find more fun, like shopping for clothes or fashion. Maybe it's about more increasing the fun side of things. And we've got some really, really interesting and really great case studies here to talk about. On the removal of friction, we've got products from Facebook perspective like Facebook and IG checkout, whereby people can just click into ads and purchase directly without leaving the platform. And so that's beginning to get rolled out in more markets globally. But again, it's just making it more simple and easier for somebody to buy. But on the fun side, you have things like live shopping, and that's been really taking off around the world. Live in itself has been taking off. So I think the last number is like 800 million people go live on Facebook every day, be that in live workout or watching a concert, watching music, etc. But there's loads of live behaviors being exhibited, and shopping has definitely been part of that, and people really using a live shopping experience to help provide a more fun and more engaging experience for consumers. And the MDS case study, which is a Singaporean fashion brand, was a really great example of somebody who pivoted to live while during the pandemic, during lockdown, because that was her only option to actually continue her business. The other interesting examples, and this gets more technical, sophisticated, the one, it's Sephora. So this is using augmented reality. So again here, whereby in an ad, you can then get your camera out and you can try on different shades of lipstick, which really makes it kind of more fun and more enjoyable, just like you would do it if you were in a retail store. And then the last example, and again, the shopping assistant, here's a concierge service by Flipkart in India, where they have Mr. Big B Bot to give you a real Bollywood experience around as a shopping assistant. Both giving you a fun experience, but also removing friction at the same time, because he actually is a concierge and helping you find the best products for you, but doing it in really engaging fun. So those things don't necessarily have to be separately. They can come together and can remove friction and increase enjoyment at the same time.
Yes, I think off the back of that point, I think individually they're all really interesting elements. We're seeing the rise of live commerce around the region. We're seeing how people are much more willing to interact with brands through messaging services and that kind of thing. So for me, that's really interesting on how brands could potentially use full funnel kind of tactics. We've spoken before about how platforms, can stretch from awareness through to conversion, but perhaps the formats haven't been there in the past. So I'm interested on how brands are using it, but also how you see the advantages of not just using certain platforms for one tactic as opposed to a more continuous message with consumers.
I'm sorry, 1 second, Josh. I have a new puppy that's trying to get in. Sorry. It's absolutely true, and I think there is fundamentally a shift of being able to, as you say, do collapsed funnel activity and really use things like live and those formatted experiences to drive, both build the brand and drive conversion. And I think it's really important that when brands try to do live experiences, they make sure that those experiences replicate the branded experience that they're trying to drive. And a simple example that's really good to think about is like, we've seen a lot of beauty brands whereby they use beauty advisors, etc., within their branded experience, within the live experience, which actually gives you, it's true to the brand. So if they're trying to promote different looks and aesthetics, etc., they'll have those available, but then also facilitating it through to the commerce experience. And similar thing happens with the AR. Like, I think one of my favorite case studies was done by Dior, where they had one whereby you could try on the different sunglasses and looks that they had for a fashion season, but they made it in the real Dior look and feel luxurious templates that actually communicated the brand, but also transitioned somebody through to sale.
Cool.
Okay, the last but not least, we have behaviors. So this is whereby we're looking to understand how the consumer, different shopping behaviors of what they're trying to buy, how they're trying to buy, and the mechanism that they're willing to buy. And one area that we've seen significant growth in is an area of subscriptions. Now, this is in part being driven by consumer demand. So the bottom graph shows people who are in different markets across Asia Pacific who have been willing to try a new subscription service. And it's true across Asia Pacific, people are trying and people are willing to buy new subscriptions. And I think if anyone based in Singapore, like me, they'd probably subscribe to Disney Plus, which will be for me now my 4th or 5th subscription service. But it's not just streaming services. These people, the data from the consumer perspective at the bottom right there actually includes things like grocery subscription services and things like that. And then from a business perspective, we've seen that businesses who are based on subscription models outperform the stock market and actually achieve much higher growth. So there's definitely, this is a behavior that the consumers exhibiting, but there's also a real business benefit for getting that recurring revenue and actually securing that. And we've seen case studies and examples across different sectors in the areas of subscriptions. And it's been something that has been really successful for businesses of different sorts. So whether or not that's gym memberships or app or work fitness apps, through to things like educational boxes and kid toy boxes, all the way through to fashion subscriptions. Loads and loads of different businesses have been able to use the subscription models and effectively acquire and achieve growth through digital commerce growth by leveraging or creating these new business models. And so that's the last one that we have. And just to quickly wrap up, the 4 areas of growth: presence, people, experience, and behaviors. There's different opportunities for different businesses in each one of them. And if there's a way in which businesses should look at this, is that they should consider, what's my category, what are the audiences that I have, what current activities have I got, and therefore what are the other opportunities for growth and opportunity and other levers that will help me achieve growth in the next 12 months or so. Josh, back to you. Any questions or anything from chat?
No, I think we're good. I think we're almost at time. I thought that was really interesting, but also really practical as well. We've gone through some really big changes. There are changes. I mean, the behaviours part for me around subscriptions is really interesting, because if you had have told me 12 months ago or 24 months ago that subscriptions were going to be a thing, that we were going to be talking to our clients about in a really meaningful way, I probably would have questioned it more than now. But I think the ease of fulfillment for people with really close delivery and those kinds of things, we're definitely seeing repeat purchase on a different level. Whether that means people are loyal to one brand or have multiple subscriptions, as you said, with those streaming services, but definitely that ease of fulfillment is changing the way that people are purchasing. So I think they're really good tips. We'll send around, for those that subscribe to the CRM, send around some really clear outtakes that people can use every day and make some practical changes to the way that they're thinking about e-commerce. So thanks, Carlos. We'll be back next time on the Loop Live to talk about some really inspirational creative cases that we saw come out of some of the award shows this year. We spoke about creative a few times this year around how we use creativity in commerce, how we think about context and relevance. And we're going to really hope to inspire some people with some good cases and an insight from some of the judges and some of the biggest marketers around the region on how to have really compelling creative work and be much more effective. So thanks, Carlos, for joining. Really appreciate your time on this one. Thanks, everyone else, for joining, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. My pleasure.
Yeah.